I know her. She's the
Okay,
sweetest.
so we have an amazing speaker coming up.
We truly do.
This woman is super funny. I love this woman. I need to just address something. If anybody is currently wearing a CGM
Yes.
that alerts you when your glucose goes up,
Yeah.
you may want to mute it. Because this woman that's coming up is so sweet. You are probably going to spike your glucose as soon as she starts talking.
This is just a public service announcement.
Okay? So, you want to tell us a little bit about...
I do. I hope everybody knows Nurse Cindy Miller. But as Nurse Cindy, that's how she's better known, uses humor and easy to understand examples to help others on the journey to informed self-care. As an RN for 40 years, Cindy has struggled with her weight. Since discovering the power of the ketogenic way of eating, Cindy has passionately been devoted to helping others discover the freedom found in fueling their body with low-carb, high-fat, medium protein foods. She's going to be speaking to us today on the basics of how what we eat gets processed through our guts and how it impacts our health. It is our great pleasure to introduce Miss Nurse Cindy.
Hey, hi. Thank you so much. Hey, everybody. It is such an honor to be with you about 45 minutes after you ate, because that means you want to take a nap. All right, that's fine. Today we're going to talk about forks and facts and fantasy versus fiction. What are we going to talk about? We're talking about, notice the F's, right? Food, fiber, flatulence, and feces. I call this talk, What the F's? No. All right, I have been a nurse for 44 years. I'm not a doctor, but we are going to talk about food, fiber, flatulence, and feces. Poop happens. That's what happens. And the potty talk can't be eliminated from this type, please. You got to work with me, okay? You got to work with me. And that's because nurses, there's other nurses in the room. We have a very odd sense of humor. We're not as funny as we think we are, but we amuse ourselves, so that's all good. So, and my sincere and everlasting thanks to the Keto Chow family for all they've done and what they do every single day. So I'm not a doctor, so that's fine, and I'm certainly not your doctor. But this talk is in memoriam for my mom and my sister. And I will cry because my sister, who passed away, graduated a year and a half ago, has always looked out for me. And everything I do and why I'm on this ketogenic journey is her fault. This was us when we were much younger. I'm the one in the dark blue, and that's my sister Debbie. And this was a couple of years ago, just to show you the massive difference that her unending support has made to me and hopefully to others as I talk about my journey. And my mom, of course, who I miss every day. And Holly made us our bacon and egg scarves, and I was wearing these last night. So this talk's for you, too. And several people have mentioned Dr. Sarah Hallberg, who unfortunately just passed away last week. And every time Debbie would call me to try to get me to start the ketogenic journey with her, I would find something else that had to happen and hang up on her. So she finally sent me this video. It's a TED Talk by Dr. Sarah Hallberg about what, I was type 2 diabetic at the time. I was 240 pounds, and she talks about what if we've been treating type 2 diabetes all wrong? What if we've been doing it upside down? Because if you have a peanut allergy, I will never say to you as a clinician, have that PBJ, but just keep your EpiPen. So why do we tell diabetics, have that sugar, but cover it with your insulin? So that changed my life. This was me at my heaviest at 305. Well, 307. Those 2 pounds are important. And those are my daughters. So this was me when I started the ketogenic journey. I was already down about 20 pounds. Just to show you a couple. There aren't many pictures of me when I was heavy. Because guess what? You offer to take the pictures, or I did. Or you can and this one I crack up because I know I'm having my picture taken. And I have a candy bar in my hand. I did not even put it down. So some of you may know me from what's called the water balloon video, where I talk about the whoosh effect, about why sometimes we don't lose for a period of time and all that stuff. So that one, you might be able to find me on that. So now 94 pounds gone, and it's been 6 years now. I started when I was 59. I will be 65 in about 8 or 9 days. and I am a recovering carboholic. Do I cheat? No, and I have this fascinating thing I'm going to explore with Dave Feldman more. We talked about it on the bus going up to the salt mine yesterday about people ask, do you have a cheat day? Do you ever cheat? I'm so fretful that I would binge and I would never recover, or it would take me a long time, that I just don't. A binge to me is to have the blackberries or have a strawberry, because I'm just fearful that if I start on that, and we were talking, a couple of us in the car yesterday, we never would say to someone that tells us that they're at their 5-year sobriety or 22 years, do you ever go out and just tie one on to celebrate? We would never do that, yet we feel like it's okay to push carbs on someone that has knowingly had a problem. So let's start talking, enough about that history. Let's start talking about all those F's. All right, so this is going to be something pretty basic. Here's my objectives in the bit of time that we have today, and where's my timer so I know how much? It's so big, I missed it. Okay, good. 35 minutes left. All right, we're going to talk about the digestive tract and how it functions. I'm going to break it down into something that hopefully is translatable for you. I work full-time for a very large corporation as a wound care nurse, and my title is Global Medical Translational Lead. It doesn't mean that I'm multilingual. It means that I try to take the difficult things and turn them into something that's actionable for people. So we're going to talk about those F words, food, flatulence, fiber, feces, and then when feces misbehaves. We won't be able to spend that much time on it today because of the constraints of time. So let's start talking about, and I'll have these scattered throughout, food for thought. Now, that's pretty funny too, food for thought. All right, so when we eat, what happens when we eat? When we eat, whatever's on my fork that I put into my mouth, I'm actually giving it a little set of instructions. So if you've ever gotten a blender or maybe a new computer, there'll always be an instructions for use, an IFU as we call it in the medical community. And that, if I read it, I'll have a much better understanding. When I take in carbohydrates, fat, or proteins, I'm literally saying to my body, once it receives it, here's what I want you to do with it. When I give it things that are hyper-processed or uber-processed, those frankenfoods, there's no instruction manual. The body wasn't built for that. So what we do is we put that food into our body where it then has to digest it. Those components are then managed based on the instructions that our body has, and what isn't needed is eliminated, and that's feces or poop. All right, so that's what happens in and out. So what I don't need comes out. If I'm sick and you've ever had diarrhea, you understand you exit out a lot more. Now, that's when we do eat. What happens if I don't eat? And that's that fasting that Cynthia talked about earlier. So when I eat, we can look at that as feasting, and when I don't eat, that would be fasting, even if it's while I sleep at night. And I have to tell you that before I started keto, sometimes if I would get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, my husband would be asleep. That would be my excuse to go sneak eat, because I did. That's what I did. When we don't eat, guess what? We're also giving our body instructions. We're saying, okay, I'm not eating right now. Insulin, you should go take a little nap. And now I can, in that fasted state, I can start to pull those fat stores, which all fat is basically, well, it's a lot more than that. It's stored calories. I was a billionaire at 240. If each fat cell was $1, I was a billionaire. I'm probably a multimillionaire now, but it's good. So work with me. That stored food, insulin in some respects is a bully. It's a master hormone. And when it is high, in order to push that glucose into our cells, because the cells have to get a signal, until it drops down, all this stored energy is stuck. It's in jail. Only when insulin starts to drop can the body utilize that stored energy. So fasting is important, and Cynthia did a most excellent job talking about the difference in women. And these specific macronutrients that I eat will determine specific reactions because they're instructions to my body, and it will tell it what to do. Macronutrients, hopefully you all know what that is. That's the protein, fats, and carbohydrates. Then they all have calories, some calorie 4 and 9 associated with it. Micronutrients, potassium, sodium, magnesium, no calories, but very important, and without those we have problems. Now let's move into all the things about the GI tract, and I'll cover each component very quickly, but hopefully enough to help you understand a little bit more about what happens when you eat. Our environment is, if there was a dot on every bacteria and virus that's on a surface around us, you would freak out. Our skin is our natural defense mechanism. It's like our suit of armor. And the only place, unless I have a cut, you've heard of beef tips? I did fingertips into the meatloaf the other night. My husband told me it was the best meatloaf he'd ever had. True story. But anyway, we have only one way, unless I have a problem with my skin integrity, for us to really voluntarily be exposed to the outside contaminants. So that's through our GI tract. So we take food that's going to have some level of bacteria in it, even if it's well cooked and been kept at the proper temperature, and we are going to put it into this passageway through our body. And we're going to take that nutrient-dense food, hopefully, that we're eating, and it's going to go through, and it's going to come from the outside and actually be internalized into our cells and into our bloodstream. And so we really need to understand that, as Dr. Lenski's talked earlier, the health of our GI tract has a lot to do with our overall health. So let's walk through what is GI. GI stands for gastrointestinal. In medicine, we use as many initials as we can. We don't say you've had a heart attack, we say you've had an MI, which is myocardial infarction. A stroke is a CVA, a cerebral vascular accident. So I want you to think of your digestive tract as a hollow, insulated tunnel. It's a tunnel, and it comes in one way and it goes out the other, and allows that outside world to pass through, grabbing what it needs, taking the food, which is a complex structure, and using what it can, and ejecting what it doesn't need. So that's feces, or poop, if you want to say that. So you've heard of an assembly line? Our GI tract is a disassembly line. It takes something complex and breaks it down into components instead of a factory where I take the components and I create something. And as with any factory, there's going to be emissions released, all right? And that's called flatulence. If you don't know what flatulence is, it's a fart, all right? It's gas that comes out that way, okay? Just saying. And most people who have start following a ketogenic, especially if you're carnivore or like me, carnivore-like, or ish, or inadvertently carnivore some days, typically you'll hear them say that there's less flatulence when you follow this lifestyle. So we have to maintain a good gut health to keep the good stuff moving in and not letting the bad stuff get in where we don't want it. All right, there we go. So, yes, we're going to talk about every single one of these in a speed round. Okay? So let's talk about mouthing off, the importance of the oral cavity, or your mouth. It consists of all these things that you see here. I don't have time to talk about them, but this is where both mechanical and the chemical digestion occurs. Mechanical as we chew it, the chemical as our enzymes in our mouth start to interact with the food. Our teeth will cut, grind, or tear, like you saw that guy in the previous slide, or Bronson eating the steak yesterday at the firing range. And what we're going to do is we're going to mash it up and grind it up into more usable pieces. It is so important that we adequately chew. If you've been following me on Facebook for a while, you've probably heard me talk about the 20-chew challenge. And that means chew your food 20 times before you swallow it. Why? Because I want to assist my body in gaining as much nutrient density as it can from what I eat. If I just one or two chews and swallow it, the stomach goes, hey, you did not do your job. I need this to come down to me sort of chewed up. So that pulp, as we swallow it, it makes it easier to swallow. It lets me roll that food around, especially if I try the 20-chew challenge, and it allows me to really enjoy that, let my taste buds experience the glory of what I'm eating. And it also lets amylase, which is an enzyme that's found in our saliva that really helps us start to digest, especially carbohydrates, even if it's a vegetable. So if I take a piece of broccoli or maybe a strawberry and I do my 20-chew challenge, it will start to taste sweeter at bite 10 or 12 or 14 than it did at bite 2, because the amylase has started to break that down into sugar. And you'll find that you really enjoy that when you do have your carbohydrates. So, spit's our friend. Tell that to your 9-year-old boy. I have a 9-year-old. I have 11 and a half grandkids, one's still in the oven, and quite a few of them are boys. So Have you ever smelled something like you walked in, you smelled it and you walked in today over here where they were making the pancakes and stuff? Salivation can occur even in the absence of food. I smell something or I think of something and I start to salivate. That's good. I need salivation. I need saliva to help me moisten that food, and it will actually also engage with the brain. I think you've probably heard Dr. Berry talk about the cephalic insulin response, where I think about a food or I smell it, and I start to get an insulin rise because it's like, incoming, be prepared, and insulin starts to come out. And believe it or not, our body can produce 2 to 4 liters of saliva or spit a day. That's pretty impressive, and most adolescent boys, I think they can do as much as they want. They can just produce it, because that's just such a cool thing, especially over a bridge or something. So it's very mildly acidic. Acid is interesting in that, excuse me, I always choke on water, I don't know why. Excuse me. Bacteria cannot thrive in an acidic environment. Our skin has a pH of about 5, which is very acidic, and it repels bacteria. So that's why you don't want to scrub with a lot of alkaline soap, especially on the elderly, because you change the skin pH, whole nother lecture. It breaks down this acid in your mouth, your saliva, especially in your stomach. It starts to help break things down. So those enzymes help your chewing turn the ambush the mush, all right, starts to break it down, and allows the bolus of food to slide easily down the esophagus. So please, chew your food well. Well-chewed food's more appropriate for the stomach to receive. It makes the digestion easier. If you have a lot of belching or eructation after you eat, you most likely did not only not chew your food well enough, you swallowed a lot of air because you didn't chew your food well enough, or you were eating too quickly and you swallowed air at the time. So if I do that, if I chew my 20-chew challenge, I have the saliva, I let it slide down as a bolus, the stomach's like, thank you, you did your job, now I'm gonna do my job, and I'm gonna continue to help. And those taste buds help me savor the food. Slowly, we have these stretch receptors in the stomach, and I'll talk about that in just a shake. When I eat slowly and I'm enjoying it and I'm in the moment and I'm not like on Facebook or watching TV or working on my computer, but I'm literally sitting and enjoying that food, my satiety signal, those stretch receptors, have a chance to actually engage in my brain, and I get that signal. It's a lot more uncommon or less common to overeat. Here's the esophagus. Literally, the only thing it doesn't really do anything for digestion per se, but it connects the mouth, the oral cavity, to the stomach, and it should go down. It has to pass through the diaphragm, which is a muscle right here. When you breathe, if you've ever heard of diaphragmatic breathing, that's the diaphragm drops, it increases, long story, but I like to talk. All right, so it's a smooth muscle. It connects the mouth to the stomach. That saliva that's moistened it allows that to slide down. If you've ever had a dry mouth and you try to swallow food, have you ever had it feel sort of stuck there and you have to drink something to help it slide down? Putting something in my mouth is voluntary. How many times I chew is voluntary. When I swallow is voluntary. But once I swallow, the rest of digestion is involuntary. It is not in my control. The body's going to do what it's going to do based on the digestive health and based on what I've built up in the way of enzymes that are available. The movement of the food, once I've swallowed it, from the stomach all the way through until it exits the anus, is called peristalsis. If you've ever sat next to someone and you hear, that is the movement or the churning of the food through some part of the digestive tract. And it always wants to move downward unless you're vomiting, and then it's moving this way. And to me, that's like, I will do anything possible to not vomit. I just really dislike that. But you know what? We're vomiting for a reason. Sometimes it's tainted food. Sometimes I have a virus or something, and I always feel better after I do anyway. But anyway, so the esophagus goes into the stomach. Let's watch this and see what happens. It slides down. It just goes down, goes past the diaphragm, and it goes into the stomach. That was fun. Okay. See, you just ate, right? So you're like, is this what's happening to me? So here's food for thought about the esophagus. We should have that smooth passage. If you have a hiatal hernia or other things that I don't have time to talk about, or Barrett's esophagus or different things, just know that that can be a problem. If you've ever choked on food, like so you're chewing something, somebody says something funny, you go, Okay, so the glottis is going to help. The way that it functions should help us not choke. The way the timing is, I think I might have a little video, maybe not, to show how the glottis will open and close at the right time. The esophageal sphincter will open and close at the right time. It's just very coordinated. And the only time we really are aware of our esophagus is if we have GERD. Anybody ever heard of GERD? Or acid reflux? It's gastroesophageal reflux disease, GERD. And what people do is they'll oftentimes prescribe an acid blocker for that. So, you guys have stomach for the rest of the talk? It's so funny. Oh, you guys got your, I'm used to having a screen behind me. So yeah, hopefully you have stomach for the rest of the talk, because we're going to talk about the stomach. The stomach is so cool because it's got 3 layers of muscle: longitudinal, lateral, and then it's got this sort of twisty layer. And what it does is when it receives that nicely 20-chew bolus, it's going to start to churn, and it's going to start to work its magic and further break it down. And so when we look at the inside of it, there's all these little ridges, all right? And if I could open that up and spread it out like a piece of crumpled newspaper, there's a very large surface area inside the stomach. So that's the inside view. Our diaphragm is there, the blue that just appeared. So our stomach has a lot of interesting functions. Once it enters the stomach, that esophageal sphincter should close, which keeps the reflux from happening. So GERD is when this esophageal sphincter allows the stuff in the stomach to move back up. And the esophagus, because it's just meant as a quick passageway, doesn't have the thickness of that mucosa that was spoken about earlier. You can stretch it between 2 and 4 liters. Who knows what a 2-liter bottle of soda looks like, or water? 2 of those, it can get up. So if you've ever been very full after a Thanksgiving meal, you know, and you think about how big your plate was, this can be a real thing. It doesn't really need to be stretched that much, and it does have these stretch receptors, but it takes a little bit of time to engage them. So the slower we eat, the faster it's going to say, ooh, I feel full, all right? And that's due to these stretch receptors. There are a thick layer of mucosal cells that start here because the acid level compared to the saliva is much stronger here. And it needs to be strong to start to break down the food and to protect us from any bacteria that's in that food that we've eaten, or even in the liquids that we've drank. I want you to think of it as the decontamination tank. It's where that protection against bacterial invasion or other foreign items that might be in there starts to be decontaminated. And it's very acidic. It's actually more acidic, the stomach acid, than battery acid. And if you've ever splashed any battery acid on yourself, you know that that burns. Because what does it have to do? It has to digest the steak or the beef or whatever you just ate. So the other thing that's important about the acidity of our stomach acid is the killing of the bacteria. So when I'm placed, or if I'm placed, and they continue that digestive process and they turn it into a thing called chyme, or chyme, depending on how you say it, really small particles. Now I wanted to show you those little, I'm so used to having a screen behind me, those little ups and downs that you see there. Inside of each of those, there's a little vein, there's a little artery, and there's a little lacteal. It's where the fats are absorbed. They don't go straight into the bloodstream. We'll talk about that more in just a little bit. So your stomach is churning and yearning to help you digest your food. So that's important to know. And this is just showing, so if you see the one on your left, that's where the sphincter closes correctly. GERD happens when that sphincter doesn't close all the way, or has a time where there's so much pressure there, it can't keep things down where it should be, and that very acidic arena of that chyme is pushes back up, and it starts to chew through your esophagus. That's why it hurts. That's why it burns. So here's a food for thought. Are acid blockers actually your friends if they help us manage the bacteria and maintain the digestion? Are they really your friends, or are there something, these proton pump inhibitors, are they something that Big Pharma has done? Because a lot of people, especially with our dietary changes over the last 20 years, are experiencing more and more. So are there alternate ways to manage GERD? Ask any of the physicians here. They'll be able to tell you, or Cynthia, or some of the NPs that are here. Now, let's move from the stomach into the small intestines. I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit. Don't confuse small with short or unimportant. Small intestines talks about the diameter of that tube compared to your colon or your large intestines. It's actually half the diameter, but it's about 22 feet long. This stage, I don't know. If I stretched out, if I put one into my small intestines there, I don't know how long this is, but it's about that long. It's all like this. It looks like a pot of pasta inside your abdomen. There's 3 different distinct areas. They each have distinct functions, and almost all of your nutrient absorption that your body's going to use to fuel itself and keep healthy happens here. And that means it's not a small thing, even though it's called the small intestines. I know, I'm so funny. So we have the duodenum or duodenum, we have the jejunum, and we have the ileum. Let's talk quickly about it. The duodenum is where the first part of the small intestines that comes out of the stomach, and this is where that sort of pulpy stuff comes out. It's the shortest part of the small intestines. We call it the mixing bowl. All right, I want you to think about this is where those components that have been broken down, you're sort of like cake batter, you're mixing it up. And the major work of digestion happens here. The bile comes out from the gallbladder here to help you with your fat breakdown and all the other enzymes for your pancreas that are used. This is not necessarily where a lot of your absorption of the nutrients, but this helps keep things breaking down smaller, that disassembly line, till we can get to the point that now the body can start to absorb it. Jejunum, which is the next section, the bulk of your actually digestion absorption occurs here. Not that you'll ever need that, but it's a great thing if you play Trivia Pursuit. And you can see how these things are broken down, the fats into fatty acids, the proteins into amino acids, and the carbohydrates into either glucose, fructose, lactose, depending on what you've consumed, and fiber. Good old fiber, it's so important. Then we move down closer to large intestines. This is called the ileum. It's actually the longest part of the small intestines, which is just so fun to think about, longest part of the small intestines. Your digestive particles continue to flow downstream past this, and this is where you start to get more water absorption. Nutrient absorption happens here, and if any of you have had an ileojejunal bypass or gastric bypass or a Roux-en-Y, your B12 absorption's here, but if a lot of that has been diverted, you will oftentimes need some type of injectable or sublingual B12 because you're not going to absorb it. You're just not, because it's just mechanically they've rerouted around that. Now, resting on top, sort of, if you will, sort of giving the stomach a hug is our liver. Tucked under the liver is our gallbladder, and that's where we store bile. Bile is not created in the gallbladder, it's created in the liver, and it's very, very important for our fat breakdown. I had my gallbladder out many, many years ago in 1994, and I'm successfully doing keto, but you got to be careful. You can ask any of the doctors here about, should I start my fat increase slowly? Yes, oftentimes you'll get diarrhea. Liver does a lot. I don't have time to tell you. There's people that specialize in diseases of the liver. And Cynthia talked about today a little bit about fatty liver, about non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or the one in between, the NAFLD, in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Did you know that there's so many young children now with fatty liver disease that some children under the age of 12 are having to have a liver transplant? And those of us that need a liver transplant may not have enough donors in the next 10 or 15 years, if you know anyone that needs one, because our youth it's so sad what we've done to them. And we could go into a whole talk about fructose in the liver, but we won't today. So there's so many things it does so far as detoxing. Alcohol is not your friend. I know I'm speaking to a great group that believe that in many ways due to your faith and where you live. If you've ever heard of a college student dying of alcohol intoxication, the liver gets so overwhelmed it cannot break down that toxin, and it literally will kill you if you have too much alcohol all at once because the liver just can't handle it. So much it does about clotting. It's a wonderful organ. It's a very busy organ, and it's part of what we do for a healthy GI tract. So just a close-up of a couple of slides. I know you're not pathologists, but I just wanted to show you that a normal liver is dark, it's compact, it's very dense, it weighs quite a bit. But as we consume more and more carbohydrate-rich foods that are rich mostly in high fructose corn syrup, the only place that fructose is actually metabolized is in the liver. And so when it can't push any more out, it starts to say, well, I'll just store it here, and we end up with fatty liver. It's not due to the fat you eat. Au contraire. All right, close up of the gallbladder, just so you guys know, if you've ever had a gallbladder attack, it's because the sediment, your gallbladder has not been contracting adequately enough, because probably you've been doing a low-fat diet, and so the sludge builds up, it turns into little rocks, and then you have a pain as it contracts when you do eat fat. So pancreatic function, we won't be able to talk about it. It's just so amazing what the enzymes that are produced. We tend to think of insulin being produced in the pancreas, which it is. I have a type 1 diabetic daughter. She's 40 now. Rachel D., you might know her from being online. But it also does all of our digestive enzymes pretty much. And there was a great talk in the van going up with Dr. Harper, who'll be speaking later on, about the time it takes for enzymes to really be functional. And if we're on and off keto, Dave Feldman talked about bingery. When we binge, we can add insult to injury. And I said, can I use that if I give you credit, bingery? There's a lot to, there he is in the back waving. So think about what happens if you've ever gone on a binge or gone off keto for a while and you get back on, and it seems to take a long time to start to get those results again. Well, one, you're older. Number two, your enzymes have to have time to adjust. They're like, what are you doing to me? So to me, this thing of carbon up once a week, I don't know. Anyway, so here's just sort of a close-up view of the complexity of what's happening when we eat food. So the more natural, the more proper that human diet food that we're consuming, my processed food, for the most part, is in the kitchen. Sometimes with great success, and other times not so much. But all of these things interplay, those inflammatory fat cells, the white fat versus the brown fat. And can we beige up our white fat? Ben Bickman, Dr. Bickman does a fantastic job explaining that. So we don't have time for all of that because I've got 10 minutes left. But all those little villi that we saw in the stomach are actually very, very robust where all that absorption is taking place of our nutrients. Remember, it's a disassembly line. And I think my key takeaway is not that you become an expert on digestion, but that what you eat matters. I can give it instructions it understands, or I can give it something in a foreign language. Have you ever read something that was written somewhere else? And it sort of kind of looks like that should, and you got the parts and the pieces and the screws and it doesn't make sense. When we eat overly processed, uber-processed Frankenfoods, it's like a Frankenstein monster. It's not really food. It's a food-like substance. It gets to this point, and the body's like, anybody got any ideas? Anybody got ideas? And the rest of the body's like, I don't know what to do with that stuff. And a lot of those things are stored. A lot of those chemicals, a lot of the colorants, a lot of the flavorings, which are not FDA regulated, are chemically made up things. They're not natural. And so these things can be stored in our fat, and that's why a lot of the toxicity of our fat cells and why they can become so inflammatory. But I want to get into this point really quickly. Once again, look at that close-up of these little goblet cells. And I want you to see, there's one cell layer. There's one cell, and they're holding hands tightly. They're called tight junctions. And if I expose it to the proper human diet, those junctions are happy. If I end up with a lot of inflammation, because I'm eating industrial seed oils, let me see if I can do that without coughing. Nope. This inflammation starts to swell. And what happens is these little cells, that thin, that mucus layer that Dr. Brian, I'm going to just have Dr. Brian talked about earlier, starts to thin out, especially if you're eating something with a lot of surfactants. Anybody heard of surfactants? A surfactant is in Dawn dishwashing. What does surfactant Dawn do if I put it in a greasy basin of water? It breaks it apart, right? I want you to think of your mucus layer that's so important for your what is it called? Your gut microbiome. I work in wound care, and we talk about biofilm, and that's not. But your gut microbiome, if I start to eat a lot of things, and a lot of your commercial salad dressings and things, they use surfactants to keep the oil and the water mixed. And it starts to destroy our microbiome. It starts to get through that mucosal layer, and it starts to hit this thin epithelium, and they're holding hands so tightly because they don't want the crap that you just ate, the bacteria and stuff, to get inside the bloodstream. They want to exit it out the anus, and when I eat inflammatory-based things, that doesn't happen. So we've got these intestinal mucosal cells, and they're healthy on your left. Then they start to become inflamed, and they're like, I can't. Have you ever seen the movie where they're holding on by the fingertips? I can't go by, And they lose that grip on each other, and now I have a little tiny microspace. Have you ever heard of the words leaky gut? Have you ever heard of leaky gut syndrome? Many times it's because of these industrial seed oils and all the uber-processed foods that we're eating. They're not the natural human diet. They're not the proper human diet. We were never meant to be able to disassemble this type of stuff. And so the remnants are left over. And now with this space, because your capillaries, let me go back to this one for a minute. Look how close your capillaries, the artery and the vein, are to those cells. They're right there. They want to absorb. Blood brings in the groceries and it takes out the trash. And so it's going to pick up whatever it can. And so when I have this disassociation between those tight junctions and I start to have these problems, and it was spoken about earlier a little bit, autoimmune disease, bacteria or food particles or things get into my bloodstream and my macrophages and all of my immune system goes, enemy alert. Attack, attack, attack. And so, like when my daughter had chickenpox and she had the autoimmune response and became type 1 diabetic, we can end up with a lot of autoimmune diseases because of the non-health of our gut. So the more we can eat whole foods, the less likely that these bad villains are going to get into our bloodstream and set up a cascade of inflammation that goes throughout our entire body. No time, because I've got 5 minutes left, I'm talking to myself. Autoimmune, pulmonary conditions, cardiovascular, arthritis, it's much of it of our chronic disease. And I work in wound care, so I deal with a lot of diabetics who don't heal their wounds well, who have retinopathy, who have neuropathy, lack of feeling in their feet, who end up with kidney failure. It's many times due to a cascade of this chronic inflammation, and all interplays with each other. So that's our small intestines. The absolute vast majority of the nutrient absorption or bad stuff absorption happens there. So what good are my large intestines, oftentimes called the colon? And it was mentioned earlier today, colitis. What is colitis? Tonsillitis, inflammation or infection of my tonsils. Colitis, inflammation of my colon. All right? So people that have ulcerative colitis is the inflammation and the damage has gotten so severe, they have an ulcer. And now that bacteria and the other things can get more easily into the system, and Bronson talked about having to go to the bathroom all the time because everything's so inflamed, you can't even keep it in. Peristalsis is going like that. You can't keep it in long enough. So this is where water is absorbed. That's why if you've had a colon resection and you have a shorter amount, it's about 9 feet long, ascending, transverse, descending. If that's shortened, then you'll be more prone to looser stool because you can't absorb all the water. It moves things down and out. That's a lot of our salts and minerals are absorbed there. And feces exits the body. It's called defecation. Feces, defecation. We're going to get it out. And if you have a good bowel movement, you're no longer full of crap. It's a good thing, all right? Down and out it goes, okay? Ascending, transverse, descending. There's the rectum and the anus, and out you go. Let's talk about poop. Did you know there's classifications for poop? It's called the Bristol stool chart. I want you to memorize this. How are you feeling? I've got type 1. Poop. Separate hard lumps. Blop, 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 little rabbit droppings, right? It most likely means what's left over from what your body doesn't need is moving slowly through the intestines. More and more water gets absorbed. Then we've got all the way down to type 7, which is that liquid consistency, no solid pieces. That means it has gone like whoosh right on through, and we've really absorbed hardly anything. And that's why they were talking about the lower weight individual, that when they changed their diet, colitis disappeared. They were able to gain weight because they were just basically shushing things through, and they weren't able to absorb the nutrients. So this is did I need to show this to you? No, but it amuses me. So I just, because poop happens, right? But what's interesting, when we look at the problem and we talk about the gut microbiome, it does involve bacteria, and they're not all bad. There are certain types, there's certain strains. I need them there because they are part of my defense. They really are part of it. We're not all bad. So we've got these bacteria flora, and what happens, especially when we eat something high in fiber, what's going to happen is we have two types of fiber, soluble and insoluble. All right? Soluble means the body has a chance to break it down and turn it into carbohydrates that can be used. That's why your net carbs can be a trap. Because if it's soluble fiber, you will turn it into sugar, and it's going to impact your insulin. If it's insoluble, the body's like, why'd you give that to me? I can't do anything with that. I know, just get it out of here, get it out. So the fiber is not necessarily for human life. Who started that horrible theory? Probably the cereal companies. I don't know. Just saying. I don't know. Do lions eat fiber? No. I don't think they're constipated either. Let's go back to the stool chart. No, we won't. All right. These insoluble fibers are of no good to us, and they must be removed, okay? It's an intricate fermentation process when we eat a lot of fiber. The body is trying to act like a ruminant, and when you hear the Sodfather talk, Dr. Peter Ballerstedt talk, they have what? 28 stomachs. No, they don't have 28, but ruminants, the cows, they have 6, 7 stomachs. They have a lot of stomachs in it, and it ferments. It can use the grass. We have one stomach, right, Peter? I think we have one stomach. That's what I heard. Anyway, so what happens is we don't have time to really ferment. It keeps fermenting. It produces gas bubbles, okay? And you end up with more farts, all right? So anyway, many carnivores report they're not full of hot air. That's good. All right, so let's move on. Let's move on to the rectum and the anus. Rectum almost killed him, but anyway, constipation. What's the real, if people have 2 bowel movements a day, oh my God, I'm constipated. No, the actual medical terminology for constipation is less than 3 bowel movements a month. No, week. I misspoke. Don't put that little clip on Facebook. Increased dehydration of feces. Please drink your water. It occurs. It's characterized by straining, pain, difficulty. The rectum parts can become filled with feces. If you don't listen to when you feel that trigger of that pressure and you don't go to the bathroom, now please, when you're driving, wait till you pull over, but you will lose the urge and other things are still moving downstream and it packs in and it packs in and it packs in and it becomes, it happens to women twice as many as men. This is so unfair. The hormones that Cynthia talked about, all that stuff is just not fair. And it tends to grow more common with aging. We tend to move quite a bit less as we age. So is fiber necessary or is it problematic? So these are the risk factors. I won't take time to do it because they're going to hook me off. But as it starts on the ascending part of the colon, it's more loose. The water is absorbed, and by the time it moves down, do you know we have this thing called a colonic urge, and we have it about 6 times a day? So naturally, about 6 times a day, you're going to think, I think I could go to the bathroom right now. Please pay attention to that and do it when you can, especially if you have constipation issues. There are non-drug options. You don't want to take a harsh stimulant. Increase your movement, increase the water, increase your sodium, your magnesium, MCT or other oils. That helps many people. Don't ignore the urge to go. And then when we have problems and we're sometimes eating too much fiber, we have a lot of inflammation, we can end up with, the diverticulitis is like, diverticuli are like little pouches and it's a long story, you don't have time, but they can become inflamed or infected. You can have all sorts of problems. Keto foods often reduce or eliminate all of this. We'll hear over and over and over again, people with IBS, people with colitis, when you remove the fiber, when you remove the processed foods, when you go to not the industrial seed oils and you go to more to that proper human diet, so much improves. Your symptoms minimally will oftentimes get better. So we've gone over a lot of stuff. I didn't even get to talk about the vagal nerve and about the brain gut, and Dr. Brian talked about that earlier today briefly. It's fascinating how our gut communicates to our brain and all the things with leptin and ghrelin. If you ever get confused about leptin and ghrelin, leptin helps you stay lean, leptin lean. Ghrelin, which is that hunger hormone, grrr, when your stomach, that's your free treat for the day. So what goes in has to come out. What happens in between is absolutely much in your power. Until you swallow them, the rest of the body will take over from there. Thanks for staying till the end. And I don't have time for questions, but we'll do it.